Well, welcome back, everybody. Panel 8 is about to begin. Well, welcome back, everybody, from coffee, and welcome back those of you joining us again online. I hope you were able to grab a coffee as well. I'm delighted to move straight on and introduce panel 8. And in panel 8, we are looking at finance for science, a facilitator for capacity building and transfer of marine technologies. We've got a great panel, as you can see. 2 people here with us in Rio, and some of our experts spread around the world, who I know are all in our a virtual green room ready to participate. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our chair for this event, Janina Bumbia, who's project manager at Biodiversity Conservation from the Grupo Boticario Foundation. Janina. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, bom dia a todos e todas. So, and also good morning for our global audience following us online. I'm Janaína Brumber from Boticario Group Foundation, and I'll be the panelist here in this amazing panel, and I'm really excited about that because it's an essential discussion we need to have here. And being here in Museu da Manhã, Museum of Tomorrow, is deeply meaningful because this has been the venue for many important ocean discussions. One of them was 2 years ago that we had the 4th Foundations Dialogue here in this stage. Foundations Dialogue is an informal network of foundations that work with ocean. And actually, Angelique was in that moment and is here again. Thanks for being here in the stage with me, so I'm not alone here. And 2 years ago, in that occasion, we organized together with IOC UNESCO, and we brought together foundations to discuss how to increase and how to optimize the investment in ocean science. So now we are here again to talk about financial issues, but to a new target, to BBNJ. And it's a really complex and challenging goal as well. So our goal today is to have a really practical panel, and we have amazing experts for that. And we want to explore how finance mechanisms can effectively support ocean science and marine technology transfers, especially to the Global South. So, and this is a valuable topic for Boticario Group Foundation as well. For 35 years, we've been pioneering match funding, innovative financing, multilateral partnerships. So this is a really valuable topic for us. And as a scientist who works with grant making, I can see that science brings us the why, but the financing and more innovative financing brings us the how. And that's what I'm going to discuss here now. I'll stop talking because I'm here more to listen and to learn with all of you. And also to make this session more interactive, we have a QR code in Slido where you can put your questions. So both online and here present, you can write your questions. So at the end of the panel, you have the opportunity to have this conversation. And I will ask every panelist to stick to the time, to the 4 minutes, because we have a lot of panelists and we really want to have this moment at the end, hearing from your questions. So to start, it's an honor to welcome Alberto Capella. Alberto, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Hello, Alberto. It's really nice to have you here. Thanks for accepting the invitation. And Alberto is the chief of the regional Seas branch of UN Environment Program. And Alberto, I have a question for you, and you have 4 minutes to address this question. How can we ensure that multilateral funding becomes more accessible and aligned with the urgent local needs of the Global South? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Janina. Bom dia a todos e todas. É um grande prazer estar com vocês hoje. Eu vou apresentar em inglês. Janina, thank you so much for these questions. Look, 2 years ago, Brazil exercised its presidency of the G20, which was a resounding success, and one of the special sessions that we had as part of the One Planet Network was there in the Museo de Amanhã. And in that presidency, Brazil brought to the forefront the issue of oceans, and it brought to the forefront the issue of how oceans was being underfinanced. And of course, at that time, we were in the middle of negotiations of the BBNJ agreement, and we were very successful in trying to create the momentum as a consequence of that presidency of Brazil in the G20. Now, there is quite a lot of excitement in the area of oceans at the moment, because we have the BBNJ agreement that marks a very historic moment for the ocean governance. And now the task is basically to move from the ratification to the early implementation. So just to set a little bit of the scene, which is always quite important, if we look into the oceans, areas beyond national jurisdiction represent 2/3 of the world's oceans. And yet the protection that they have at the moment is only limited to 1.45% or 1.5% of the high seas. You compare that to the national waters, and here we're talking about the economic exclusive zones, which roughly covers 39% of the global ocean. And there we have 22% of those waters under some form of protection. Now, the problem that we have is that we know that substantially there is a lack of funding that is actually necessary in order to unblock some of the investments needed to effectively manage the oceans. And here we do have a couple of estimates and some figures that I wanted to share with you, because the gap between the ambition and the investment requirement is quite large. So the effective global ocean conservation is estimated to require around $175 billion per year. And yet the current spending is only a fraction of that level. So there is a very big role for the international multilateral system to contribute to close that gap, including some of the big funds, the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund. But we need to go beyond that. And a lot of the examples that we're seeing from countries is basically to identify that there is a great opportunity for domestic sources of funding. So leveraging private sector funding, leveraging these big institutional funding mechanisms that are available, and trying to do partnerships with them. We do have a couple of examples that I wanted to share in this panel. And they relate to, one of the examples is new financing mechanisms which are emerging. So for instance, the One Oceans Finance Facility, which is advancing as a coordinated global platform to mobilize large-scale investment for ocean action, bringing together the public finance, development banks, philanthropy, and private capital. And it aims to mobilize around $170 billion per year by 2040. This would unlock that blended finance that I was just talking about and supporting the delivery towards the fruition of the ocean management and conservation. But let me also address two very critical elements. So yes, financing is one of the major gaps that we need to close, but so is the issue of the governance. We cannot manage our oceans, and what I mentioned, that there's a big separation between national waters and the high seas, without having regional cooperation. And this is essential for this conversation, because the governance is really where the governments have the implementation, that they want to have in terms of making sure that their oceans are under conservation and also, importantly, under the sustainable use. So this can not only happen at the global level, so it must be anchored within existing regional frameworks and institutions and networks that bring together the different countries to manage the shared marine resources. It is here that, from a unit perspective, we do have the Regional Seas Program and the other multilateral environmental agreements, which can serve as powerful delivery platforms. For the Regional Seas, for instance, there are 18 Regional Seas conventions and action plans, and they cover 146 participating countries. And they already provide the governance structures, the scientific collaboration, and the policy coordination mechanism. In some regions, they already develop specially protected areas and biodiversity protocols, provided that level of experience through which we can enhance the area-based management tool that supports the management and conservation of the oceans. And then the other one, and I will conclude with that, is let us make sure that we have the right science. If we are going into the enhancement and the translation of financing, let us remember that we need to be based on science. And in that sense, it is equally important to recognize the role of intergovernmental science policy platform that can inform implementation of the management of the marine and coastal environment. In bodies such as the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBS, and the newly created Intergovernmental Science Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste, and Pollution Prevention. These panels demonstrate how governance and the scientific community can work together to assess evidence, synthesize global knowledge, and translate complex science into policy relevant for decision makings. I think these are the three areas that I would like to focus on, Janina, and of course, very happy to continue to expand that in the second part of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto, and it was really thoughtful and organized the speech and helped us to see the amount of investment we need for ocean is as big as the ocean itself, but it's not only about how much, it's also about how to invest in this money as well. So, and with that in mind, I'd also like to invite now Andrew Hume, who leads the Global Environment Facility, GEF. GEF's programming for BBNJ. So as a marine scientist himself, he understands both the technical and the financial requirements of international waters. So Andrew, can you hear me as well?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, we can. Thanks so much for joining us. And the question for you is, given the GEF's role, how can we streamline funding to support the scientific requirements of BBNJ implementation in developing nations? The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'd also just like to briefly thank the organizers for this excellent panel and this invitation today. So regarding the question on streamlining funding to support BBNJ implementation, here at the GEF Secretariat, we're well aware that streamlining is not often associated with GEF funding, but I would like to challenge this view. Any process that prioritizes inclusiveness and transparency will never be the fastest. And what's traded in speed is gained in trust, transparency, and predictability. And this has been true at the GEF for over 30 years and will absolutely be true for the GEF's role as part of the financial mechanism for BBNJ agreement and supporting the agreement's implementation. What's important to remember is that the GEF was not structured as we are today overnight. Many of my colleagues have heard me say this before, but the current functioning of the GEF, including many of its streamlining measures, are the result of a constant evolution. This means that we're always improving. And by me, I should really stress it's the entire GEF partnership. It's the 18 GEF agencies, including my UNEP and UNDP colleagues on this panel. But most importantly, and especially, it's the 185 GEF member countries. So, for example, we're about to conclude the GEF 9 replenishment process, which serves as an important opportunity to further improve Jeff streamlining efforts. One example of this, you may be aware that the Jeff also hosts other trust funds, including the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. And this Global Biodiversity Framework Fund has a much faster and more simplified project cycle in response to CBD COP guidance. The intention is that this GBFF project cycle will be the future of the Jeff project cycle, and in other words, be mainstreamed, the streamlining efforts of that trust fund into the support that will be provided from the Jeff to the BBNJ agreement. At the country level, we're also encouraging countries to establish national steering committees to better plan and coordinate the deployment of Jeff resources. These national committees should include government focal points across the multilateral environmental agreement landscape, but especially including the BBNJ agreement. And if there's one lesson that we've already learned from the existing Jeff support to countries for BBNJ agreement ratification and implementation readiness, it's that the BBNJ implementation will require this strong internal government coordination, including having a national BBNJ focal point. We've already expedited the Jeff approval process for supporting the BBNJ agreement. And so now Jeff funding, when requests are made to the Jeff to access the existing funding, this can be approved within the matter of weeks. However, our experience so far over the last 2 years has been we often see bottlenecks within national government as to who should initiate this request to access the Jeff funding. And then after a Jeff approval, identifying which government entity or other stakeholders are responsible for coordinating execution of activities within the country. And so our hope is that by the end of this year and the beginning of Jeff 9, many countries will be discussing their Jeff funding priorities, including BBNJ agreement needs as a committee. And we found that this kind of streamlining, this kind of committee-led effort will streamline decision-making. But I think more importantly, it also helps identify opportunities for integration and cross-support across the country's MEA engagement. And this could be especially valuable for leveraging existing science capacities and marine technology transfer activities across government and provide to national stakeholders to benefit the BBNJ agreement implementation. I'll just end with one more example of progress and opportunity, I think, for the BBNJ agreement. We know that direct access to public funding is an important topic. And while the Jeff is not well structured to implement this directly at present, we have plenty of existing global projects that achieve a similar goal. Many in the room may be familiar with the Jeff Small Grants Program, and this is one good example. But other global projects like the Blue Nature Alliance, the Enduring Earth Partnership, the Inclusive Conservation Initiative, these are also great examples of how Jeff funding was allocated at a global scale and then regranted often much quicker than the normal Jeff approval processes to a range of government and other stakeholders, including IPLCs and CSOs. And this type of innovation within the existing Jeff instrument is an important place for continued streamlining that could support BBNJ implementation, especially around capacity building and marine technology transfer for the Global South. As many of my colleagues on the panel already know, you have an ally in me to think about how we can push up against the limits of the Jeff partnership to meet the evolving needs of countries. So we hope that the BBNJ agreement is this latest opportunity for us to think creatively and be innovative and work together to identify these solutions to ensure countries are best equipped to see the agreement succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'd like to highlight what you mentioned about the evolution of the evolving of Jeff, and the finance ecosystem is really alive and is evolving all the time and innovative. So we need to have faster and more faster and better initiatives to reflect the urgency we have now in the BBNJ agenda. And now I want to invite Adnan Awad. He's head of the Water and Oceans Program at the UN Development Program. Adnan is a specialist in marine ecology and has extensive experience in implementing sustainable ocean management solutions across Africa. Hello, good morning, Adnan, or good afternoon.
Hello, hi Janina. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being here with us. And another question for you is, what are the critical on-the-ground bottlenecks for blue finance reaching science projects? So we've discussed about the amount of resources, how they should be directed, but okay, now the execution is key. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Janina. And let me extend the thanks also to the organizers for inviting UNDP to participate in the symposium and in this important discussion. And also express my solidarity with Angelique, who's unfortunately the only one on this panel that is in person. And I'd love to be there in person. And I do look forward to really seeing many of the colleagues in New York in a couple of weeks' time. My initial response to the question, which is quite related to the work we do, is to turn it around and say, well, does blue finance actually reach science projects? And really to answer that, we'd have to unpack what we mean by science projects. And I'd argue that the type of blue finance that we're involved with deploying and that's often referred to in the multilateral context is often supporting projects and processes that are gleaning available and relevant science for management and policy outcomes, and by design, and this is a good thing, but it implicates the need to separate the types of science funding that we are actually interrogating. So I'm comfortable with commenting here on the core role UNDP has, first of all, to support member states, the needs of member states, their interests in a sustainable development context. And here in this forum, we're largely talking about issues and bottlenecks that affect the global South. So in our role of assisting governments to access ODA, donor funds, and design, secure, and ultimately implement projects, we help with a range of challenges and to overcome challenges on the ground that they encounter in deploying funds and various aspects of project implementation. That could themselves all be considered as bottlenecks, and there's a lot of lessons therein. But when it comes to the core of the question, which is support for science, a key concern, is that the treatment of science and that science is not seen as central. It is rather peripheral to the core funding objectives and the implementation frameworks through which we work. And this is true for both marine and terrestrial contexts. So I would frame that as a key bottleneck in the context of science relevant to ABNJ and that underpins BBNJ, because the funding for science is fragmented. It's often short-term, project-based, doesn't create the sustained capabilities that are needed on the ground. The institutional capacity and infrastructure would be one dimension, and technical staff expertise would be another, where really the connections and development of relationships are quite an important dimension, and ultimately the mandates that connect institutional processes to decision making and policy. Insofar as regional and national governance mechanisms should and do create the enabling environment for financing, this is happening for many sectors. Foundational science remains, for the most part, marginalized as a target recipient. So let alone the financing that is necessary for a long-term vision, for science infrastructure, for formal integration into governance mechanisms that would be aligned with local priorities and resources. We do have good examples, so it's not to say that these constraints are ubiquitous, but I'd say some of the examples are in place in spite of these constraints. I'd highlight the Western Indian Ocean region, for example, where decades of investment through GEF projects from bilateral donors have led to a relatively complex regional ocean governance framework, but one that is concertedly appreciated and participated in by its member states. The role of WIOMSA, the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, I would flag in particular, is important in supporting science throughout the region, especially with respect to youth and emerging scientists, which has become increasingly consequential and aligned with the interests of the various government agencies that actively participate in the Nairobi Convention and related processes. So there are certainly differences between countries of the region in terms of their ability to leverage that regional support and advance scientific commitments and support at national level. But there are also some standouts in the region that we could talk about separately. But that heterogeneity also extends to the regions of the world, right? Regional ocean governance frameworks and mechanisms differ greatly around the world, and most developing regions are struggling with consistency and sustainability of funding arrangements that support scientific capacity and outputs. So coming back to conclude on BBNJ, its implementation really does provide a opportunity here to build on the network of regional ocean governance frameworks and arrangements that we have, as imperfect as these may be, but in ways that really leverage those successful developments. And by that, I mean the government participation and buy-in, the transboundary cooperation around shared resources, regional approaches to capacity development, the intersectoral processes and institutional relationships, both formal and informal, so that the evolution of the treaty, largely through the scientific and technical body, can emphasize guidance through regional subsidiaries that ultimately will bring more consistent and sustainable financing for ocean science in the global south. And this in turn, really brings some teeth and some focus to the treaty's emphasis on capacity building and technology transfer for those countries that are already indicating such interest and need. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Adnan. And it's a pity to have such few time to discuss all of this, because I'm sure it's a central point in the discussion of the BBNJ implementation as for any global agenda. So now coming to the stage, Angelique Pouponneau. She is a legal expert, may I say brilliant legal expert, and key negotiator for Alliance of Small Islands States, AOSIS. She has been a pioneer in blue economy and sovereign debt swaps for ocean conservation. So, Angelique, how can we ensure that there is both access to finance and the transfer of marine technology for small islands states? And what are the main hurdles to having effective implementation on the ground in this regard?
Thank you, Jana. I call you Jana because we're friends now, right? Good. What time is it? Good morning, colleagues. So really happy to be on the stage here and to follow what has been already really useful contributions. And I do represent AOSIS in negotiations. I don't represent them here. So I'll be giving a very personal take on the question. So first off, I think always worth saying that available finance doesn't mean accessible finance. And of course, first, we have two challenges: to make it available and at the scale that we need, which you've already heard, but then to make it also very accessible. And small island developing states in particular has been emphasizing this whole issue of access to finance. And I want to really set the context here about why small island developing states often talk about issues of access. So first off, although many of you know me speaking behind the Palau flag as the chair of AOSIS, I'm from the Seychelles, right? And Seychelles has 100,000 people. And this morning I wrote to my Brazilian colleagues and I said, can you point me to a village in Brazil that has 100,000 people so I can get the context right? And they said, you can say Parnaíba. I hope I've said that correctly, as one of the villages. But imagine 100,000 people. We are custodians of 1.5 million kilometers square of ocean, all right? In real terms, what that looks like it is the size of France and Germany combined. So we're quite busy. What that means is that one person is doing more than one job, probably about 5 on average. And because we have a limited tax base, right? You're taxing 100,000 people. You have a limited economic base, predominantly based on fisheries and tourism. What that means is we are very much dependent on external financing. So really, in the current landscape, applying for whether it's climate finance or development finance. And what that looks like is that one person who is responsible for 5 other jobs also has to write project application after project application after project application. And the barriers that are often invisible, right? It's a project application. What's the barrier? Just fill in the form. But there are numerous invisible barriers in the types of questions that are being asked, the types of data and evidence that is being sought for us to put together this application, making it very lengthy, bureaucratic, and then after doing all of that, you realize you have to wait 3 years to get the money. So what that has led to in the current landscape, and particularly with in the climate finance landscape, is we have these things called the readiness program. That is essentially a clear sign that there's a problem when we have to set aside funding to pay consultants to write project applications. All right? So the question is, will we do anything different now that we have the BBNJ agreement? And does it inherently have to be different because we're dealing with areas beyond national jurisdictions? And I'll point to three elements in particular that I want to emphasize on. And the first is we need to move to a programmatic approach. The whole idea of writing project proposal by project proposal is just simply unsustainable. So imagine you do have a marine protected area established in the Western Indian Ocean. And Seychelles says, I need reinforcement with my ports authority in order to exercise our obligations under the port states measures, for example, because we'll be part of the sort of making sure everyone's compliant. Will Seychelles apply for one project to get capacity building? I think we would all be better off if there was a programmatic approach where there is a group, not even, I won't say SIDS, only SIDS, a group of developing countries, a group of countries as a whole, in fact, being able to access capacity building, and which shouldn't be project by project. We should just look at how to finance a sort of a multi-country, multi-region approach where we're able to access capacity building rather than the special fund evaluating, or the JEF evaluating one project proposal from Seychelles that looks exactly like the project from South Africa, that looks exactly like the project from Brazil. All right? So we really need to think about how do we have a programmatic approach when it comes to BBNJ. The second piece I want to highlight on is direct access, and Andrew spoke about this because he probably knew I was going to bring it up. So then there's the issue of direct access, right? And you have to ask yourself the question, what has been the problem with having direct access? Is it the amount of money? Or is it in reality that we just don't have a trust-based finance system? That's probably it. But the reality is that many developing countries and small island developing states in particular have already gone through rigorous accreditation processes to access multilateral funds in the billions of dollars, like the Green Climate Fund. And to think that we would have to do this again for us to access finance from the financial mechanism of BBNJ would be terribly onerous. And we all know that the accreditation system to funds in itself already take a very long time. So I'd say, if you've done it before, let's trust that you can continue doing it. And let's move towards a more trust-based financing approach when it comes to BBNJ. Besides, this isn't about national jurisdiction. We all want this to be successful, right? These are the common heritage of humankind. And then finally, on technology, we're all going to need technology to really make this work, right? We're not going to have blue hats flying in across ABNJ to see if things are working. We're going to need technology. But what we don't expect is for Seychelles to go and negotiate with the holders of big tech to make sure that it has the technology requirements for it to be able to contribute effectively to the implementation of BBNJ. And I think we need to be revolutionary in the way we think about technology, and I think we need to think about how us as an international community are engaging with the private sector to make sure that all countries are benefiting from that technology to make sure that there is effective implementation. So I'll stop there. Programmatic approach, direct access, and collective bargaining power when it comes to technology. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelique, and thanks for being this voice and bringing all these issues for the main audience. And I wish you have even every time more and more people like you, not only sharing all the 5 other occupations they have, but having this occupation of sharing this and all the information we need. As you talked about private sector, let's go to the next speaker. As we've seen more and more the role of private sector in the global agendas, environmental agendas. So I invite now Thorsten Thiel. He's the founder of the Global Ocean Trust and brings over 20 years of experience in infrastructure finance to help make ocean conservation bankable. Hello, can you hear us well? Good morning.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me. It's delighted to be with you. The role of the private sector in de-risking is crucial, but I think the key concept to understand is that the private sector needs predictability of financial returns, and one of the key considerations is clarity of governance and regulations. So to communicate to the private sector, we have to say that the BBNJ itself is a key de-risking tool for investment flows. And what are these opportunities? Take Brazil. Brazil may want to undertake deep ocean biology discovery to make better, more accessible medicines. Or take a small island developing state that is concerned about coastal community resilience and wants to use integrated ocean models to improve planning, use remote sensing, eDNA, satellite architecture. All of this the BBNJ can make easier, but it will be achieved through the types of public-private partnerships that reduce costs and share outcomes across sectors, from the conservation outcome that the BBNJ is looking to operational efficiency for industry, to sustainable development outcomes. And this can be achieved also by using public procurement rules. So for instance, we can consider an international body aiming to implement the goals of BBNJ, providing long-term contracts to private sector companies who help implement. And so then the specific financial tools such as guarantees, blended finance, patient capital really are situated inside that broader approach. So we can do this building on models of cooperation, such as we have in the UN Decade for Ocean Science and Sustainable Development. We can use the BBNJ Special Fund as a mechanism to strengthen developing country capacity to fully engage in BBNJ. And we consider specific financial instruments, such as a high seas blue bond issued by an international financial institution, that private institutional investors will buy, so it's private money flowing in, that can fund large-scale monitoring infrastructure implementation support. But to do all of that, we need to encourage public and private funding into mechanisms such as the special fund. And therefore, we need the special fund to have structures that facilitate resource flow and easy access. And we have to cooperate with existing international financial institutions, with the GEF and others, to strengthen pathways that lead to more private sector spending. All of this is what I call building ocean finance literacy around the value of science and innovation that facilitates investments into ocean assets. I will be at PrepCom 3 with the IUCN Observer Delegation and look forward discussing this further with any of you. Because for me, the single most important thing we can do on the finance side is to implement exactly what the BBNJ Article 52.3 is intending, which is adequate and accessible, new and additional and predictable financial resources. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks so much for this. And I really believe in the power of these partnerships, public, private, and all the sectors. Not only believe you see that's the only way you can reach the main goals we have. And now we are going to our last panelist, Claire Jolly. Thank you. Claire, are you here? Do you hear us well?
Yes, perfectly.
Clary is the head of the ocean economy at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and a leading expert on the economic impact of science and innovation. So Claire, how can OECD frameworks help countries to quantify ocean science value to attract more and more diverse partnerships?
Well, thanks very much for the question. A very ambitious objective here. And this is a very interesting symposium. I was lucky to follow it online a bit from London over the past couple of days and now from Paris. So for ocean science value, and my good colleague Thorsten just mentioned this importance of value, I think we need a new narrative, one that elevates ocean science from being considered a cost to being recognized as a strategic data and knowledge system that powers and protects the $1 trillion ocean economy. And this is not a crazy number. We've developed this report on the ocean economy, where we do have some data on the importance of ocean industries to the world economy. But without robust science, especially for implementing the BBNJ agreement, as we heard earlier from Margaret Leinen about the many data gaps we have about biodiversity in the high seas, well, we cannot secure the ocean value to our societies. So I think we are all convinced in this room and online, but let me share with you here 3 concrete measurement approaches that we're exploring at OECD that could maybe help change the narrative. So the first one is to link ocean science to the value chains of the ocean economy. Again, this is a bit of a narrative shift. So using the OECD data, detailed ocean accounting at country level. At OECD now we have detailed economic time series on the ocean economy for the past 25 years, for more than 80 countries. So countries could eventually map how scientific data and technology support specific sectors, such as fisheries, shipping, energy, tourism, coastal protection. To give you a concrete example, if a country's fisheries sector generates $500 million annually, the value of regular science-based stock assessments, ecosystem monitoring, and oceanographic modeling becomes then visible as a risk management setup that protects and sustains that revenue. We see this in a number of regional fisheries management organizations. This is the type of discussions that are happening as well. A second approach is to actually quantify avoided losses and risk reduction. So this is a large share of ocean science value that's often forgotten. For instance, ocean observing systems, we know they improve forecasts for shipping and offshore operations. We have measurable evidence on this as we explored value chains of marine data across the economy with a number of OECD studies. Even small improvements in route optimization or storm prediction can save millions in fuel, insurance claims, and downtime. This again reframes ocean science and ocean data infrastructure not as a cost, but as a key risk reduction system. And finally, the third approach is to measure innovation and technology spillovers. I was, over the past couple of days, in London at Oceanology International, and that was an incredible example of some of the transfers that we are seeing across sectors with the ocean tech communities. At the OECD, we are developing at the OECD new innovation metrics to help countries track marine technology startups, patents in marine robotics, sensors, other areas, and eventually technology transfer. So here, the value of science also includes direct sector productivity, like maritime logistics, new technology markets, and of course, highly skilled jobs. So this is a third element. All this to say that obviously fundamental research on ocean biodiversity and climate processes will be essential. These are essential. Again, I'm not convincing the crowd here. I know everybody's on the same wavelength. But we are at a stage where I think we can also use a new mindset and some measurement tools to actually build up the case, build up the evidence, and link science to sector value chains, innovation, avoided losses, so that we can demonstrate better that investing in ocean knowledge, including in the high seas, will support much more than research. So I'll stop here, and I thank you again for this invitation to contribute some of the work that we're looking in developing even further.
Thanks so much. So we see you have to evidence that financing is not as a cost, but as an investment for all of us in our future. So we have some time for questions now. We don't have time for more questions of us here, but the speeches were so amazing, and I'm sure we have a lot of panels and events about this in the future as we had for the first COP, and you have the opportunity for make things different in a different way since the beginning, if you compare also to other big agendas and other COPs. So as I note here, it's something that's really clear. It's not about only the amount of money. It's not only about how much we have. Yes, a big amount of a gap of investment in ocean science. We have to fill this gap, but it's not only this. We have to have collaboration, and only with collaboration we reach more efficiency, and so we can have innovation in these models of collaboration, and this investment must be accessible, and trust-based financing approaches, programmatic approaches as well. So as we work in this partnership and taking finance not as a cost, so how we tell this history for the others and for other investors. So I'd like to know, do you have any questions? So Anonymous, again, he's really engaged in this event, in these 2 days. So the question is, why do we always speak about finance for the BBNJ, requirement for return or investment, and not about funding? No requirement for return or investment. So it's a really interesting question because we just mentioned that, and I'd like to know if you have who would like to answer this question. Maybe if you can also put our panelists here in the screen, it would be also amazing. And maybe Claire could answer this question for us.
I'd be happy to, and I think that's a very good question. You would think that funding or public funding would be, of course, the perfect solution as we are looking at the ocean as a common good for humanity, right? But in reality, we know that public budgets won't be ever enough to actually help us manage and implement the BBNJ agreement at this stage. Philanthropy might suddenly come as another perfect solution, But talking with quite a number of actors in philanthropy, well, they're dealing with many, many other big issues for humanity these days. So they won't be as well, the perfect second plan B solution. So we really need to be able to talk to industry. Because at any time of the day, you're going to have tens of thousands of ships actually in the high seas right now, different parts of the high seas. And these people, whether it's merchant fleets or fishing fleets, they're also users, in a way, of the high seas. They need to be involved in the conversation. And I do believe there's interest for them to be actually involved in investing in the systems that we're discussing here and protecting, conserving large parts of the high seas. So yes, funding would be a perfect solution if we think public funding is the perfect solution, and that will be a large part of the equation. But we need to move beyond just public authorities, I believe.
Thanks so much, Claire. And we have used all of kind of resources and investments we have, and also in an innovative way. So again, Anonymous, given the difficulty of assessing remote ocean areas without fishing sector support, is going to work. Okay, I'll try. Given the difficulty of assessing remote ocean areas without fishing sector support, is going to work if enough strengthening the sector's support. So somebody would like to answer this question?
I'm happy to try it, if I may.
Please, go ahead.
I think I understood the question as how can we strengthen complementary sectors that are operating in a similar space to help with implementation. And I think this is an area where it's worth highlighting that the role of the GEF programming for BBNJ, while will be a standalone set of funding for GEF 9, we're looking at roughly 75 to 125 million US dollars over the next 4 years. But there is additional sources of funding that the GEF provides to work in areas beyond national jurisdiction that have existed for several decades now, that do largely support work with RFMOs. And I believe Nico in the earlier panel mentioned this from the FAO side, where we're actually supporting a global BBNJ project that part of it is working directly with RFMOs to engage awareness and further design thinking on ways for cross-collaboration integration. So while the GEF in itself may only have a certain line item for BBNJ, there is a large amount of additional resources going to adjacent actors that can benefit and will benefit from engaging in the process and informing how the BBNJ implementation works. So hopefully that's helpful.
And now Angelique will complement the question.
Yeah, no, thanks. And just building off from where Andrew left off, I think it's really great that we had the IFB's panel before this now, the finance panel, because of the linkage between the two. And Andrew's already spoken to sort of the funding of different initiatives that of activities that engage in ABNJ that's going to be relevant to BBNJ. And I think we also need to be very creative. I'm thinking here about Margaret's keynote, which is still ringing in my mind, about the point she made where she said the STB will have to be very careful about the threshold or the standards that it sets in terms of evaluating marine protected area success because we don't have data. And I think that's going to be a huge financing gap, right? The fact that we see that there may be a need to finance more research for us to have more data to be able to inform a lot of that decision. But I think we're going to need to be, and that sounds like it costs a lot of money. And I think we're going to need to be extremely creative. And I've been sort of playing with this idea in my mind, and I don't know if it'll be of interest to folks, but you could just imagine the number of vessels in the shipping sector that's out there. And it makes you wonder if it would be possible to have a collaboration with the Maersks of this world and say, can you place something at the bottom of this vessel that can that can monitor water quality as it sails throughout ABNJ, and then be able to channel that data to whatever repository that we think will be helpful. But that would involve having a lot of tangible collaborations with multiple sectors in order to get that data. But it does mean being sort of out-of-the-box thinking will be required if we're going to sort of narrow the financing gap. Because to the point about return on investment, the reason many have turned to this idea of the private sector and the need for return for investment is very much the investment gap, that public funding simply would be insufficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique. And I'd love to be here talking to you and my dear panelists here, but this lovely woman will kick us out here if you don't leave. But I really like to thank you all for being here, and I hope you have the opportunity to talk about that again. And also thanks INPO, Andre, the organization, for trusting this panel to us. And I'd like just to reinforce that as a Global South scientist and Latina woman, that investing in science, technology transfer, and capacity building is not only technicalities, it's a matter of equity as well, and we must have that since the beginning. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Goodbye. Obrigado.
Thank you so much, Danena. Excellent sharing with some brilliant contributions. Thanks, Angelique. Thank you. So look at that. We're on time. It's midday. That's great for anyone tuning in from online for our final panel. And it's looking good for